Welcome to Litigation Nation. I'm your host, Danessa Watkins, here with my co-host, Jack Sankar. And as a reminder, this is the show where we cover the hot, exciting legal issues across the nation and keep you updated on what's going on. So, Jack, what are you covering today?
So Tesla is in the news again, this time for potential securities and wire fraud investigations relating to the advertising of its full self-driving features.
And I'm also actually covering a DOJ case. Recently, the Justice Department entered into a $138.7 million settlement over the FBI's failures in the Larry Nassar case. All that and more, here's what you need to know.
As we mentioned in the intro, Tesla is back in the headlines. It seems to always be. And this time over the ongoing investigation from the Department of Justice and the SEC relating to its marketing efforts and some of the statements made by its executive and founder, Elon Musk, specifically as to Tesla's self-driving capabilities, which is a key element of their marketing for the automobiles that they sell. According to an article that was published in The Verge just a couple of days ago, Tesla is under scrutiny from the DOJ for its claims that its vehicles would be self-driving within a set amount of time. And I should note that on this particular claim by Tesla, it's always been a moving target based on the public statements of its founder and CEO, Elon Musk. For example, in 2016, he claimed in an interview that full self-driving status would be, quote, no more than 2 years away. That's 2016. We're recording this in May of 2024, and obviously we're not there yet. He's made a lot of other claims along the way to the effect that full self-driving capabilities would be forthcoming over the past few years. And in my observation, in my opinion, usually those statements come out around the time of big investor actions or shareholder votes or earnings calls, things like that. So that's the kind of the crux of this investigation is, broadly speaking, whether the market is being manipulated by these statements, this kind of optimism around Tesla, around a product that it may or may not really be close to putting out. So going back to the Verge story, quote, according to Reuters, the probe is looking into statements made by Tesla CEO Elon Musk in particular. For years, Musk has been promising fully autonomous Tesla vehicles are just around the corner, while also admitting that he often sets overly optimistic deadlines. Meanwhile, the company's advanced driver assist features, autopilot and full self-driving, do not make the vehicles autonomous and require drivers to keep their hands on the steering wheel and eyes on the road. Unquote. Now, the Verge report was published just a day ago on May 8th. We're recording here on May 9th, 2024. And the Verge report relies pretty heavily on Reuters reporting going all the way back to 2022 when the criminal investigation by the DOJ was actually launched. The reason it's back in the news is based on some insider and sources that have been leaking some things to Reuters and also some news about new subpoenas and document requests and things like that. Quoting from the Reuters report from earlier this month, quote, there are Tesla videos demonstrating the technology that remained archived, opens on the Tesla website in a new tab, which says, the person in the driver's seat is only there for legal reasons. He is not doing anything. The car is driving itself. A Tesla engineer in 2022 in a lawsuit over a fatal crash involving autopilot that testified that one of the videos posted in October of 2016 intended to show the technology's potential and did not accurately portray its capabilities at the time. Musk, nevertheless, posted the video on social media, writing, quote, Tesla drives itself, no human input at all, through urban streets to highway streets, then finds a parking spot. In a conference call with reporters in 2016, Musk described autopilot as probably better than a human driver. And during an October 2022 call, Musk addressed a forthcoming FSD upgrade, and parenthetical FSD means full self-driving. A forthcoming FSD upgrade that he said would allow customers to travel to your work, your friend's house, or to the grocery store without you touching the wheel, unquote. As my own personal experience, I've been in a Tesla before. They are pretty cool vehicles, but in what I think the consensus is that they are far short of this, full self-driving capability. They seem to have the autopilot system is pretty neat to experience firsthand, but it's not far off from what a lot of competitors have already been including in their vehicles for a long time, and they don't market those things as full self-driving. Things like lane assist, smart cruise control, things like that. Those are all features that a lot of other vehicles have. Even my 2018 Subaru does. Uh, so it's just anecdotally, it doesn't seem to. It does set itself apart from what other folks are doing, but I think we'll get into in a moment what some competitors have already put out there that they're not calling full self-driving is in some ways exceeding what Tesla is able to do at this point. So, on the investigation itself, the Reuters report summarizes some of the goals and challenges that the probe may have pretty nicely. Quoting back from Reuters, quote, the investigators will need to demonstrate that Tesla's claims crossed a line from legal salesmanship to material and knowing false statements that unlawfully harmed consumers or investors. Three legal experts uninvolved in the probe told Reuters. U.S. courts have ruled that puffery or corporate optimism regarding the product claims did not amount to fraud. In 2008, a federal appeals court ruled that statements of corporate optimism alone do not demonstrate that a company official intentionally misled investors. Justice Department officials will likely seek internal Tesla communications as evidence that Musk or others knew that they were making false statements, said Daniel Richman, a Columbia Law School professor and former federal prosecutor. That is a challenge, Richman said, but the safety risks involved in overselling self-driving systems also speaks to the seriousness with which prosecutors, a judge, and a jury would take the statements, unquote. So this is a kind of a classic case of the executive as a salesperson for the company and as cheerleader for the company, maybe making some claims that aren't going to be backed up by what the company can actually do here. And that's a problem for everyone involved, lest you think that this is, a Tesla hater podcast, which it's not. But it's a problem even for anyone listening because of the way in which Tesla has been integrated to the U.S. economy and the size of the company. So it has a market cap of, I think, close to $1 trillion, if not more. I haven't checked recently. It was at one point the most valuable company on the planet, despite the fact that it's selling significantly less vehicles than even a company like, say Toyota or GM or whatever. So that the share price and the investor optimism around this is based almost entirely on this claim that the vehicles are going to be self-driving sometime in the very near future. And that's been driving Tesla investment for the past, 10 years. If indeed it's not the case that Tesla is really even close, and I don't know one way or the other. I mean, maybe they'll launch it tomorrow, who knows? But if they're not close, that's going to hurt the share price pretty dramatically because what's priced into that share price obviously is the full self-driving capability. Without that, it's just an electric car company, and it was pretty early to the market for electric vehicles, but there are a lot of EV competitors out there now, and many of whom are offering the same capabilities from just the electric vehicle perspective. It seems like every automobile manufacturer is doing that already. So the issue and the real harm here that the DOJ is investigating is how these statements from Musk and probably others within the company have maybe inflated and maybe illegally inflated the share price. And as I mentioned, it does seem like these statements tend to come out whenever there is a shareholder vote, whether it's to do with executive compensation for Elon specifically, or the issuance of more shares, or around earnings calls, things like that.
So when I was listening to you talk, Jack, I was going to ask you if this is going to potentially lead to shareholder suits, but I just jumped on Google real quick and found that, Forbes in February of this year was reporting on an update about the shareholder suits. So there have been suits filed. One seems to be related to these mischaracterizations by the CEO and other higher ups in the company. But it looks like this was filed in, I think, California. But because that, I guess, a couple of the plaintiffs, the contracts that they signed have an arbitration clause, it looks like the judge is not approving the class action suit, and it's going to have to go to arbitration. Um, the other ones are focused on injuries. Let's see. There was a verdict return in April of 2023 finding that Tesla was not responsible for a crash that occurred in 2019 where the driver died. There's been a couple other suits like that, and it looks like Tesla has not been held liable. But yeah, there's certainly both the Department of Justice and shareholders paying attention to these potential misstatements.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Tesla gets a lot of attention, and every time there's a crash involving Tesla and maybe involving autopilot, there's a lot of media scrutiny around it, one way or the other. And whether that's fair or not, I don't know because I'm not tracking, how often there's a manufacturing issue with, a Toyota or a Subaru or whatever that leads to a car crash. To compare it to the frequency that's happening with Tesla. I don't know whether it's higher or lower than the margin of error that we kind of all accept. So I don't want to like dwell on the specific instances, although we have covered them in the past of the crashes involving Tesla, things like that. I know there have been a bunch of interesting allegations. One which is that when a Tesla is engaged in autopilot and is involved in a crash, it automatically turns off the autopilot like in the split second before the crash, so that when you go and look at the like black box data, um, it'll show that autopilot was not
Oh my
engaged.
gosh,
Yeah, I mean,
that's
I
crazy.
don't know if that's been substantiated, but that was an allegation. So yeah, the point is, uh, the if Tesla self-driving cars were a thing, right, tomorrow, it would be a huge deal, right? The roads would theoretically be
Mhm,
safer. Everyone would go buy a Tesla if they could afford it. It would change, the way our relationships with our vehicles. I mean, this is the optimism case for Tesla. It would be legitimately a huge deal, which is why everyone has been buying uh, equity in Tesla for the last 10 years because it would change the economy. Um,
mhm.
but if it's all kind of fluff and BS, that's a big problem. uh,
Well, I think you can't. I know we are not going to be experts on this subject as far as safety concerns, but you can't minimize the obvious safety issues when you have the CEO making statements like side mirrors won't be needed. That's
right.
making some pretty big promises.
Yeah, and the thing about full self driving, and which like the opponents or kind of Tesla negativists would point out, is like when you say that to a driver and they take you at face value, the understanding is I can take a nap now. I don't even have to have my eyes open. And so
Right.
now the margin of error is if this thing fails, it's a catastrophic failure because the driver is completely disengaged, which is why the law so far has required um, drivers to keep their hands on the steering wheel and to ostensibly pay attention. Now you can go on YouTube and find videos of people doing all kinds of crazy stuff in their Teslas
Mhm.
while self driving is engaged, and like none of that is like good or safe or probably legal. But yeah, that's the big issue is if this is if people are trusting in this software to operate and it doesn't, well, the downsides are pretty significant. I'm sure if you asked uh, Tesla that whether they had this capability, they'd say yes. But when push comes to shove, if that were the case, they would say, you know what, we'll go ahead and assume liability for these crashes or for these malfunctions or whatever, and they haven't. So I think that is a pretty significant indicator of how much faith they have in their own product, for example. And
Yeah.
based on it doesn't to me. And people who have listened to the show, I'm a bit of a tech pessimist. I think over the past couple of years, we've learned a lot about when Silicon Valley makes claims like this, like what to actually expect. So I don't know. I think maybe the folks in Washington are getting wise to that as well. And it matters because of the amount of subsidies that companies like Tesla get from the taxpayers, the state, at federal levels. It matters from the investor perspective. But the DOJ is at this point pretty focused on the market manipulation aspect of it. I also think the SEC, I believe, is also involved. Like I said, I don't want to see Tesla stock tank because that'll hurt my retirement account, and probably most people that are listening in one way, shape, or form. It'd hurt the U.S. economy pretty badly. But at some point or another, they're going to have to make good on this promise, or else they're just an electric car company, and that's nothing wrong with that. That's fine, but it's not. It doesn't justify, $1 trillion market cap when a company like Toyota sells, I don't know, 50 times as many vehicles, and is valued much smaller by the market.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. And you said that they've been investigating them since 2022 on this?
Yes. So the DOJ's perspective is that they would be claiming that investors and consumers were defrauded or were induced to be defrauded by these statements. The SEC will talk more about specific elements of like market manipulation and securities, et cetera. But the long and short of it is they've got a lot to prove, and I think that it needs to be done quickly from the Tesla shareholder perspective and government regulatory perspective as well.
All right, another Department of Justice case. There was a recent settlement that was reached, $138.7 million to be exact. And this was over the Larry Nassar scandal and allegations that the FBI failed to protect the victims of Nassar over a number of years. So this settlement is pretty far-reaching. It covers 139 claims from different women, essentially claiming that they were victims, now survivors, of sexual assault from Larry Nassar, and that the FBI not only had notice of this, but ignored it. Completely dropped the ball, failed to talk to local authorities, failed to conduct any sort of investigation, which could have saved as many as potentially 70 of his victims. So Nassar has been accused, just a little bit of background in case you've been living under a rock. Larry Nassar has been accused of abusing hundreds of women and girl athletes as young as 8 years old while working at Michigan State University with USA Gymnastics and also local schools and teams. So in 2017, Nassar pled guilty in federal court to charges of possessing child pornography and also destroying and concealing evidence when he believed, correctly so, that there was an investigation by law enforcement that would reveal his child pornography activities. So for that, he was sentenced to 60 years in federal prison. And then in Michigan State Court, he pled guilty to 10 counts of criminal sexual assault. And before his sentencing, 156 victims spoke over 7 days, really recounting similar stories over and over about going to this doctor for treatment related to sports injuries, only to be sexually assaulted under the guise that it was a form of treatment. So as a result of that, Nassar was sentenced to 40 to 175 years in prison. And just because this story hits home for me, and I'm a firm believer in the protection of sexual assault victims. I just love this judge's comments during the sentencing. She said, quote, "As much as it was my honor and privilege to hear the sister survivors, it was my honor and privilege to sentence you. Because, sir, you do not deserve to walk outside of a prison ever again. You have not owned yet what you did. I wouldn't send my dogs to you, sir. I've just signed your death warrant." End quote.
This is the judge who I think ripped up the uh, was it the sentencing guidelines, because I think it was, I might be confusing with something else, but it was a televised sentencing, and the judge like stood up and like ripped up a piece of paper and made a big show of it, I think.
I remember that. I'm not sure if this was her. This is the quote I just gave you is from Judge Rosemarie Aquilina, but it would make sense. Okay, so now how does the FBI come into play here? Well, In 2021, the Inspector General for the Justice Department, he issued a report revealing that agents at multiple FBI field offices were tipped off to Nassar's crimes but failed to adequately investigate or notify local authorities. One of the most prominent examples is that the FBI's field office in Indianapolis, they received complaints about Nassar as early as 2015. And the report concluded that senior FBI officials in that office failed to respond to allegations with the utmost seriousness and urgency that they deserved and require. The office also made numerous and fundamental errors when they did respond, including, like I mentioned, failing to notify local authorities. So, the result of this mishandling, or I guess better described as a complete absence of any semblance of competency, those are my words, is that Nassar continued to abuse 70 or more athletes from the time that the FBI was first notified until August of 2016, when the Michigan State University Police Department received a separate complaint. So, despite all of this, the DOJ said that it would not be bringing charges against those agents who mishandled the investigation, and actually, some of them subsequently lied to cover up their mistakes. So, in 2022, 90 survivors of Nassar's abuse brought a suit against the FBI, and their suit included a prayer of damages for $1 billion. Now, these claims were filed under the Federal Tort Claims Act, which gave the government 6 months to respond to the injured parties before they could file suit. So I believe during that time, they started to negotiate potential settlement, because the outline of the agreement was actually reached last year. And then over the past few months, lawyers on both sides have just been determining the specific payouts. So the awards that each claimant will get will vary based on the abuse, but the reports indicate that the settlement will result in approximately $1 million paid to each survivor. So, as much as this settlement serves as a successful resolution potentially for the survivors, Mick Gruel, who is one of the attorneys for 44 of the claimants, including actually one who died of suicide, has said that this offering by the government is just really too little too late. New York Times quoted attorney Gruel as follows: "These women were assaulted because of the FBI's failure, and there is no amount of money that will make them whole again. Their goal with all of this was to make sure that this never happens again. He hopes this deal will close the book on this and will help lead them to a path of healing." End quote. Now, I read the story of one of the survivors, Alexis Hazen, who first reported abuse by Nassar in 2016. She claims that she endured his abuse from ages 12 to 18, and she is now 26, married, and a mother of 3 boys. So she gave a phone interview to the New York Times, and she said, quote, "I'm relieved but disappointed that no one is being held accountable for failing to report the abuse and for sweeping it under the rug. In a way, this helps me be able to move past this, but it's always in the back of my mind that, wow, if the FBI didn't protect me, could something like this happen to my children? And that makes me really, really mad. I definitely have no trust in that institution anymore." So, in case you're wondering, Mr. Nassar is currently serving out his sentence in federal prison in Florida. And in July of 2023, he was stabbed multiple times in the chest, back, and neck by another inmate, suffered a collapsed lung, was lucky to survive, but he did, in fact, survive. So, I mean, just looking at settlements like this, it's really impossible. I mean, how much is enough? No amount will ever be enough. For many of these survivors, this is really bigger than them. They're seeking change for the future so that this never happens to another athlete. And how do you ensure that? On the one hand, yes, we should give some credit to the DOJ for admitting that the agency was at fault and had shortcomings. It's not often that we see organizations like this come out and say, yeah, we got this wrong. But, some have suggested here, why are there not consequences on an individual level? Like, why are we not holding those specific FBI agents that didn't take these athletes' complaints seriously? Why aren't they personally liable? I did look a little deeper into that just to see if there was anything. And the two the two agents that were mentioned most prominently in the Inspector General reports. One of them was the head of the Indianapolis field office. He retired shortly after the report came out. And then another one, he was fired and then ended up suing the FBI in federal court to overturn his firing. He lost that, by the way. But
Jeez.
so there really
Wow.
were no repercussions on a local level. So I don't know if I don't know what the answer is here. I mean, yes, it's great that the government is taking accountability, but is this really going to change things in the future for future potential victims?
You know, I don't want to say that it's a small settlement. I mean, it's not. It's 138 million, um, which is a weird number because there's 139 claimants. So I wonder
Hmm.
that it's not a $1 for $1 million per. Um, and they sued for $1 billion, and some of the individuals in that class, I think, are pretty high profile people. Some collegiate athletes. I think some Olympians, for example. Uh, one thing
Yeah,
that
some that will be actually competing in the Olympics coming up. So Simone
yeah,
Biles and
yes, yeah, I know.
Hallie. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
What's what's interesting to me, and this is not as a right and wrong thing, but as as an attorney, um, I it seems like it's a settlement that is maybe being reached in interest of maybe doing the right thing. Too little, too late, of course, but because I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, claims under the FTA, um, FTCA rather. Uh, I mean, there's still a proximate cause element here, and you know, I I don't know. Failure to investigate typically, at least in the local context, police officers, things like that, is usually not actionable, or at least not successfully actionable. Law enforcement has broad discretion to decline taking on investigations that, for one reason or they don't want to, and that could be for a number of reasons. That could be, in this case, it seems like whatever bias or um, lack of taking it seriously with respect to these claimants. I mean, who knows? I have no idea. Um, but there is a proximate cause element that I think maybe would have given the claimants a problem down the road, because they still have to show the elements of the FTCA are broadly similar to what you would see in standard tort action. Injury. The employee has to have been acting within the scope of their authority as a government agent. Um, the the employee would have had to have been negligent or wrongful or intentionally or otherwise, and then there has to be the proximate cause. I mean, the proximate cause, not cause in fact, but proximate cause of the injuries here is Nassar, right? Um,
Hmm.
so this does seem like a negotiated peace between the parties, which is good, of course, for the claimants. Um, but I think it does reflect probably a real risk uh, of a ruling down the road, which would bar the whole thing. At least that's my 2 cents as a tort litigator, in just spotting the issues here.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point, and I try to put my emotions aside on the issue, because I certainly think that when it comes to sexual assault claims, they are in a different category than just a failure to investigate a robbery or something like that. I mean, the fact that we have these figures, and I found them in multiple reports, that between the time that the FBI was first notified of this until the time where the Michigan police took it seriously, I mean, they have a firm number. There were 70, if not more, victims that were abused during that period of time. So, I mean, what evidence they have of that, I can't tell you firsthand, but let's also keep in mind, like you said, the climate of what's going on now. Obviously, we've had the Me Too movement, the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. was developed in, I think, March of 2017 is when it officially opened its doors. And that was in large part because of the Nassar scandal becoming public. There were a lot of congressional hearings about this, certainly a ton of attention. So, yes, maybe to some extent this is a result of the media that was put on this issue. I mean, and rightly so. It brought about some real change and some good change in protecting our young athletes. It's just unfortunate, obviously, that so many people had to be injured in order for us to get this change. Um, but you brought up, that interesting point of just how do you prove proximate cause in these type of cases. And I did dig a little bit further into this because I think it is kind of monumental that the Department of Justice will enter into a settlement this big. But this isn't the first one, and there have been more recently settlements involved with the victims of mass shootings.
Okay.
So in 2023, the victims and families of the 26 people that were killed in the 2017 shooting at a church in Texas, they received 144.5 million in a settlement with the DOJ. Now, this was after a federal district judge in Texas ruled that the Air Force was 60% liable for the attack that occurred. Um, Officials had failed to submit crucial records that would have prevented the suspect in the Sutherland Springs shooting from obtaining from a licensed gun dealer the semi-automatic rifle that he used in the attack. This is the findings of the judge. The judge also found that Air Force officials were aware that the gunman had previously researched and threatened a mass shooting and had a history of severe mental health issues that had led officials to declare him to be, quote, dangerous and, quote, a threat. He also had a domestic violence conviction by a military court.
Mm.
So, uh, based on all that evidence and the Air Force's failure to pass that along, the judge awarded originally 230 million to the families, and shockingly, the Justice Department appealed. Um, they argued, quote, there is no dispute that the U.S. Air Force personnel failed to transmit to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System information about the gunman that would have identified him as ineligible to purchase that firearm. But that mistake is not a legally proper basis for imposing liability on the United States or for finding the Air Force more culpable for the deadly massacre than the shooter himself, end quote. So that's exactly what you were just talking about, Jack, of how do we have this judge saying that the government is 60% liable for the attack when it's not the one that actually carried out the shooting?
Yeah.
Um, so those were the arguments that went up on appeal, and while it was pending in the Fifth District, the government did settle for that $144.5 million figure. So certainly less than what the judge found at the district court level, but still a very sizable settlement, especially after having heard, what I just read to you, their position that they couldn't be held proximate as the proximate cause.
Yeah, and I know that the victims in this case also had they have prosecuted their claims against they prosecuted their claims against Michigan State, uh, against Nassar individually. There's a lot of civil remedies.
USA Gymnastics also, they brought claims against. So
Yeah, I mean, and to some extent, not at all to make an excuse here, but if you're at the FBI field office and you get a phone call about in a an individual, on a college campus, a college employee who's doing something wrong or the other, one or two of those phone calls, you may think to yourself, I'm trying to just rationalize this. Well, that's a university issue or that's a state police issue. Bring it to the university, bring it to the cops. Like we're the FBI here. It's we've got terrorists to chase and all sorts of other things to worry about. But there, you cross a threshold pretty quick when you've ignored the volume of complaints that they seemingly did. And we haven't talked about the real issue, which is the cover up aspect of this, which
yeah,
I think I'm sure that the settlement release in this includes release of claims for that element. to the extent that there is one. But like that in and of itself is, I think, signifies that these folks knew they crossed the point where they knew they had screwed up, and then were trying to keep themselves clean here, and that's obviously some evidence of of intent, or at least evidence of knowingly wrongdoing at a certain point or another. So yeah, it's tough. I think that the settlement amount here is reflective of the both sides recognizing some risk here, and not to be cynical, but uh, Simone Biles, is a national icon. She's a treasure. Uh, the A sexual assault claim filed by someone of her star caliber, uh, individually, for example, would would demand a larger settlement than $1 million, right? Um,
Right.
so for it to be split this way among the parties, and everyone, thankfully, it seems like everyone in the that brought the claims are being compensated along with everything else, and that doesn't make them whole at all, but it does reflect some recognition on behalf of probably the plaintiff's lawyers that um, getting a judgment might be less than a sure thing, which is good. I mean, that's ultimately the point of this type of settlement arrangement.
Yeah, that, and I think, I mean, like I said before, I think a lot of these athletes are not doing this, to line their pockets. I
No,
don't
not at
think it's
all.
about money, and it's more about the recognition that there was a extreme, you know, failure in the system and breakdown that should never happen again. Of course, this is going to take a hit on the government from a monetary standpoint, but also from a reputational standpoint. I mean, when you, like you say, have one of our nation's treasures saying she can't rely on the FBI, I mean, that that's serious, and it's something that I'm glad that the government took seriously.
Yeah, and the last thing is, this undoubtedly, at least hopefully, is going to come with remedial training and protocols and internal procedures at the FBI, for if and when this hopefully never happens again, but something like it does, to prevent this catastrophe from from unfolding the way it did. And I think that's the real benefit to the public here.
Absolutely. And even on just the most basic level, understanding that certain crimes are should be treated differently. For someone to come forward
Yes.
about sexual assault is a very different thing than someone coming forward about, their TV was stolen or whatever the case may be. And so, yeah, training officers too. You can't just tell someone to call the local police. You need to actually take the step of referring it to the local police yourself.
Yes.
You can't expect victims to come forward multiple times to multiple different agencies.
Right.
So good for, I don't know, good for the government for taking a serious look at this and admitting fault, and yeah, hopefully they improve their training and do better. Do
Yeah.
better next time, please.
Thanks everyone for listening. As a reminder, this show comes out every other Tuesday, roughly twice a month. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your shows. If you have any questions, or you want to follow up on any of the stories that we've covered, or figure out kind of who in Danessa and I are, you can drop a comment and we'll do our best to get back to you. Otherwise, you'll hear from us in 2 weeks.